his knowledge, his understanding of Jesus Christ. He wants those who follow Christ to have as vivid an experience as possible without actually being there, as John and Peter and others themselves had. And I want you to notice a couple interesting keys here. He mentions, we saw these things, we proclaim these things also to you. Now the word also there, the word also right here is actually the word and sometimes it means, I do this and that. In this case it means we had this experience and also we want to proclaim to you. It's more of an also. So also, we proclaim these things also to you, and then he repeats it, in order that also you may have these experiences, basically, is what he's saying. The word hina is right here. That word is in order that, for the sake of, for the purpose of. This is a conjunction that is used very often, and these conjunctions are very squirrely. They have all kinds of uses, but the more I see this word hina, in order that, for the purpose that, the NASB translates it so that, it really is pointing to purpose. Why am I doing this? Why are we proclaiming these things to you? Well, let me tell you why. There's a deep and significant purpose. So what is that purpose? We proclaim also to you in order that you also may have. Now I think we want to say salvation. We proclaim these things to you so that you may have salvation, so that you may get saved. And I'm you catch me at a funny time in my life because I'm really trying to understand that Scripture is not always talking about getting saved and not getting saved. And I know I was on this soapbox on Wednesday, so I'm sorry to jump on it again. But John isn't saying I'm proclaiming these things to you so you can get your fire insurance and you can get eternal life and then you can go about your way and do whatever you want to. That is a step to get you, for you to have salvation and eternal life. He wants you to have eternal life. He wants to proclaim that to you. But that is just the beginning of a phase of fellowship where you can enjoy fellowship with other believers. And it is not the salvation itself. That changes our eternity, which is already predetermined by God, but that's another we'll get into that in Ephesians or something. So that affects your eternity, but we are still living in this life. And in this life, we are called to have this koinonia fellowship with other believers. And actually, who specifically we're going to have fellowship with, as we'll see in a few words, is interesting as well. What is fellowship? Well, obviously it's potlucks. I mean, the verse is clear. It's our third ordinance. I was raised in a Baptist church. Come on, I know what fellowship is. No, actually, a couple of years ago, at a church I was at, we did this. We switched our Sunday school format to adult Bible fellowships. And we were trying to basically kind of find an in-between, a hybrid of Sunday schools and small groups. And it worked pretty well. It was a nice deal. If you wanted to jump into another group on Sunday morning, you had the freedom to do that. But it was kind of a way to develop ongoing relationships with people. As you're learning about the same thing, you do have some socials, you do some activities together, and you try to minister to one another's needs. So as we reformatted our Sunday schools program into more of an adult Bible fellowship, I was given the task, because I was kind of behind the thing, of defining what does the Bible say about fellowship? What is koinonia? It's a word we use a lot. It's a word that just in our mind tends to just kind of mean eating. And there's that factors in certainly, but there's so much more to what the Bible means when it says fellowship. In fact, I wrote this all out when we put it on the church's website, and I went back and I checked 10 years ago or so, and it's still on there. Because I thought it was a good study, and apparently someone else did too. So let me just give you three things. As I studied what fellowship, where the word koinonia is used in the New Testament, I kind of categorized them around three ideas. Koinonia are activities that accompany the gathering of believers, such as teaching, prayer, sharing of resources. Acts 2:42 through 47 is a key text here. And I'll let you chase some of this down on your own. We're not going to read the whole passage, but he uses in verse 22, he uses the word koinonia. And then he talks about there's teaching, there's gathering together, there's prayer. A lot of focus, devotion to prayer in the early church. That's interesting. That's something else I'm kind of processing in my mind that I can see that I myself can be doing better at. But anyway, and then there's the sharing of resources. And the author of Acts, presumably Luke, he says this is koinonia. This is what the early church did. They were engaged in this amazingly close and intimate interaction where there was ongoing teaching, there was ongoing sharing of resources, there was all kinds of prayer, there was commonality. There was persecution, but they found support in one another in the koinonia way of life that they were enjoying. Now, eventually, this becomes somewhat unsustainable, and they move from meeting on a daily level to meeting once a week. But there was still a koinonia, there was still a fellowship that they had in the early church. It's really interesting, by the way, how many people throughout church history, and even nowadays, are wanting to go back to the original infant Acts chapter 2 kind of model for church. They're tired of all the hoopla that we've put on church, that we've added to church, and we all do it. It's not just a shot at the Catholics or at the Anglicans. We all do it. We all put a bunch of cultural kinds of things on what churches should be doing, and a lot of people want to make a move past all those things back to an Acts 2 model, and I find that very compelling myself. Koinonia, what else is koinonia? Koinonia is the material contribution that some believers provide for other believers. Paul, especially in 2 Corinthians, he is going around and he's raising money for the poor in Jerusalem and the poor in some other people, for poor believers. And he refers to this as koinonia. This is part of the fellowship that you have with these people. This is not some kind of a state-run welfare system. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about the fact that God has blessed some believers and that they have the privilege, this is not just a guilt trip that Paul's laying on them, they have the privilege of helping other believers who are in significant need, especially when those individuals are in significant need because of their testimony of Christ. This is not just help someone because they're unemployed or because they have this problem or that issue. This is specifically people who are being persecuted because of their faith in Christ. And because of that, they're in a culture where they're not able to get jobs, where they're not able to sustain their life, basically. While we're in 1 John, let's flip back to Hebrews 13:6. Interesting, for all the heavy stuff that the author of Hebrews gives to us in the last two chapters of Hebrews, he doesn't just leave it with the theological and theoretical. He really brings it down and says, okay, this is the ethical kind of life you need to live in light of everything that he said in Hebrews chapters 1 through 11. Hebrews 13:16. Hebrews 13:16, and do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Now it's interesting, if you back up to verse 15, he has said, through him then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is fruit of lips that give thanks to all his name. So he gives thanks to his name. So he's talking about praise and worship and the corporate gathering of believers to adore and to sing to and to speak of God. But then he says, it can't just stop with the lips. And in verse 16 he says, don't neglect doing good and sharing. The word sharing there is the word koinonia. For with such sacrifices God is pleased. And in the broader context, the idea seems to be meeting the needs of those around us. Look back at chapter 13, verse 3. He says, remember those who are in prison, those who are in need, those who are in difficult situations. Those are the kind of people that we need to be sharing with, have koinonia with, be able to materially support. And a third use of koinonia, a third category, and if you find more, please let me know what you find. But I think koinonia also describes the unity of believers regarding what we believe as well as how we act. Now in 1 John, in the next couple of verses, in 1 John 1, 6 and 7, he will talk about koinonia that is based on whether we are walking in the light or not. Well, what does it mean to walk in the light? It means reflecting God's moral excellence and purity in the way we treat one another and in the way we behave. So it is not just doctrinal unity, it is also unity of our lifestyle, of our ethical behavior. Now, John doesn't go into all that in 1 John 1:3, though I do cite it in terms of what we need to believe. He is saying there at least that we need to fellowship. We need to believe what the apostles are saying about Jesus and have that fellowship. If we want to go in a different direction and we want to say, well, that was nice for the apostles, but my experience of Jesus is different, then we are going outside of the bounds of apostolic Christianity. I would argue we are going outside the bounds of Christianity. So fellowship includes teaching, it includes prayer, it includes the concern of the needs of individuals, the sharing of resources, attention to basic apostolic Christianity in terms of our doctrine and our practice. And John is going to get into a lot of doctrine and practice as he goes. He's going to make some statements about, what you need to be a Christian. If you believe in something else, you're not a Christian. But our goal should be to balance all these elements and make sure that our koinonia it includes the material sharing of resources, it includes prayer, it includes teaching, it includes attention to the essential practices and doctrines of our faith. And to balance those elements so that we create a more balanced community of believers, so that we are all equipped to do what God has called us to do. Koinonia is not just something we do on Sunday mornings or Wednesday nights. Koinonia, Christian fellowship, biblical fellowship, is a way of life. And I think this is what John is trying to say in verse 3. We proclaim these things to you so that you can enter into a meaningful way of life that recognizes the apostles' experiences and teachings that were given directly from Christ himself. John wants his audience. Now let's look at something else. I think hopefully you're all done. And if you didn't get all that, then let me know and we'll get those notes to you. So notice how he says here. He says, we proclaim also to you in order that also you may have fellowship. So there's the koinonia. We want you to have fellowship, not just we want to get you saved. Now, by the way, I don't mean to minimize that. And I really think it's funny how we've divided evangelism and discipleship. Evangelism is the beginning of discipleship. People get saved so that they can become meaningful, contributing, productive members of. In fact, that's what we've been talking about on Wednesday nights. This very deep parable of the soils. You have 3 soils that are unproductive, and you have one that turns out to be productive. And Jesus saying, I want you to be productive disciples. And as I've tried to argue, I don't think that has anything to do with salvation. I think that has everything to do with what God expects of believers, what Jesus expects of those who follow him. And the reality is there will be those who follow him who are not productive, and we better not be in that camp. We better be productive followers of Christ, so that we may have, in order that we may have koinonia, that we may have fellowship. And then notice what he says. We may have fellowship with. Now here again, I'm going to ask you, what would you say here? We have proclaimed these things to you in order that you may have fellowship with God, with Jesus. I think that's what I would say. That's not what he says. I mean, look at the text. We proclaim these things so that you may have fellowship with us. I think he's saying something extremely important there. And again, this is a little uncomfortable because we're really in a society, hey, it's me and Jesus, just the two of us, God and me are a majority, this kind of thing. And I don't need anybody else. I don't need anybody interfering with my relationship with Jesus. But John says he wants his audience to have fellowship of the experience with us. With what is us? Us is the apostolic community, the apostles themselves and their followers. That fellowship, now he will follow this up and say, and I made this a little smaller so I could fit it all in. And our fellowship